Here we go. Recording has started, so there we go.
All righty. All right. So, first of all, I want to thank you so much for doing this, Jamie. So, for the beginning of this interview, can you just briefly introduce yourself, your name, your qualifications, your current job, and then I'll talk about why we're even doing this interview.
Sure. So my name is Jamie Batts, and I am a new to the field educational developer slash instructional designer. And I've been in this current position for a little more than 6 months now, officially, but I've been doing instructional design work and educational development work for almost 20 years. So before I was in this position, I was a teacher leader in K-12 education and concurrently an adjunct in the STEM field. And so I have a lot of experience with instructional design at both the K-12 level and the higher ed level. And it's all in the STEM field, mostly biology focused courses.
Awesome. So, being a STEM educator myself, basically, I wanted to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM. And basically, how do you have an inclusive STEM design? I've read many articles about issues of inclusivity in STEM. And I just wanted to narrow in on how can we help that with design. So that's basically what this interview is about today. So the first question that I have for you is, can you recall a design project for a STEM course where diversity, equity, and inclusion was of a particular concern?
That's a good question. It's interesting. My perspective on this is very different than what most people in higher ed would approach it with. And that is because as a trained K-12 educator, DEI and inclusivity was always something that has been embedded in everything that we do, in any lesson, in any professional development. These are things that you innately do as a K-12 educator. So the fact that it is now this like quote unquote like new thing in higher ed is a little, I mean, it's frankly disturbing because it should have been here the whole time. And so there's a gap, right, between where K-12 is in terms of their inclusivity efforts and where higher ed is. And so in terms of my own personal approach or my own personal kind of mission in including DEI in my course design, it's always been there because it's always been something that I've done. And if I had to pick one particular thing, it's always when I design online courses or create online courses, just having the accessibility kind of mindset in where I'm just thinking of my students that might have trouble accessing information, including things just as access to the internet, right? Just being able to get to a place to print, right? Taking those assumptions out of the way and providing resources and flexibility in the course design is highly important, especially in online courses, which is where the majority of my course design at higher ed has been.
Okay, awesome. So you kind of answered my next question, but I feel like I can phrase it a little bit different. So do you think it is more labor intensive to design a STEM course with the DEI in mind, rather than just approaching it as just a straight design versus, all right, I want to make it an inclusive design? Do you think it's more labor intensive?
So I always approach teaching and pedagogy with this concept of like front loading work or like back ending work. And I feel like as instructors or instructional designers, the more front loading work you do to make sure that you're transparent, to make sure that you're not making assumptions, to make sure that you're embedding accessibility and inclusivity into your course, the less back end you'll have to do, right? And by back end, I mean those emails that you get from students, or those like 5-minute conversations after class where students are asking questions, or, you know, asking for, you know, exceptions, or asking if they can do it this way or that way. The more you embed that transparency and inclusivity into your course in the beginning, it saves you time in the end. So I honestly think it's a equal. I think it's a wash, right? Whether you design a course with those things in mind or you don't, you're going to end up doing them anyways as a good instructor. It's just, are you building the plane while you're flying it, or do you have a complete plane before you take off the ground? And that's always how I've approached pedagogy in general.
That's an awesome analogy, honestly. I never really thought about it like that. Okay, so there are many challenges to creating an inclusive pedagogy, some as implicit bias, lack of diverse resources, stereotypes, and gender and race bias. How do you address these challenges in the different stages of the ADDIE process?
So, first of all, it was interesting that there is an ADDIE process, because again, in K-12, it is just good teaching. It doesn't have like a title or a name or an acronym for it. So I found that kind of interesting. But in general, this just goes back to, again, good teaching and keeping all students in mind. When you design your pedagogy, when you design your course, are you doing a case study that is relevant to your student population? Are you giving and assigning readings that are readable? You know, are you providing resources to support students in their writing process, right? All things that you embed in your course design will help students, you know, no matter how they're kind of coming to your class in terms of their identity or in terms of their background. So I don't think that there's any individual challenges other than the fact that I am clearly a white woman, right? Coming to class as this, you know, privileged person, and just my general perspective sometimes isn't what my students see and feel in their own reality. So if anything, that is the challenge. But that would be a challenge no matter what I teach and no matter what I was doing in a situation. So it's always on me as the instructor just to be sensitive to that and recognize it in myself, which is, again, just what good instructors do, right? So.
Right. So I have a question, because you do have an advantage, and I would say we have an advantage, right? As far as we're educators also. So we get to see both sides.
Yeah.
But if you weren't an educator and you were just a designer, how do you even approach those challenges of getting to know your target audience, of being able to avoid, like you said, right? So you're coming from a privileged standpoint as a designer, coming from a privileged standpoint. If you weren't an educator, how would you even approach these things in your design?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I feel like my colleague, there's two of us at Goucher that are in this role, and he is not an educator, and he is an educational developer, and so he is very much into the research and into more of the theoretical approaches, and looking at what the literature says and looking at what research and data says, whereas I'm more of like the feet on the street. Like I like know what's happening because I live it, you know, I see it. And so I feel like if I weren't an educator in this role, if I didn't have that classroom experience as an instructional designer, I would be doing the same thing. I would be looking at the research and looking at what best practices are in terms of what you know, what research says we should be doing in terms of DEI and inclusivity, and implementing things that way, which is they're one and the same ultimately. One just comes with a little bit more experiential knowledge, and one comes with more like reading and book knowledge, right? So either way, you have to get the information.
Right. So what other challenges do you face as a designer for STEM courses when DEI is a concern? Are there any other challenges?
Yeah, in my role as an instructional designer slash educational developer, I find that this is again a generalization, but most STEM teachers do not think it applies to them. And so whenever we have workshops or trainings or roundtable discussions or anything that surrounds like DEI or inclusivity or even accessibility, right? All equity minded discussions or topics, STEM teachers very much have the attitude of, well, my content is my content, right? Because we're not a humanities class that's discussing race or power or perspectives, right? We're not having these kind of racially charged conversations in our class because cells are cells, DNA is DNA, chemistry is chemistry, right? And so the perspective that your identity doesn't matter, a student's identity doesn't matter when you're having these conversations, I think is what is so important for STEM educators to realize, is that it does matter. There is a lot that different perspectives and identities bring to the table when you talk about physics, right? Like when you talk about STEM topics, there's still a place at the table for identity, and that and understanding positionality is something that I think a lot of STEM educators, I guess in my experience, just don't seem to have a grasp on, because they're just thinking the content is the content, and those things don't quite matter. So as an educational developer slash instructional designer, it's always a challenge to help them see the value in getting this type of training and getting this type of perspective and understanding how DEI initiatives can really make a difference in your classroom.
And how do you do that, honestly? Because it seems like if you're designing for a STEM instructor and they're just like, that doesn't matter, just give me the straight science of the matter. Like, how do you even?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's two approaches, and it depends on the instructor themselves. So this is where I go back to my firm belief that like relationships are like the background of everything, right? It's all in your interpersonal relationships with your colleagues, knowing how to interact with them, knowing how they relate to you, right? And so some faculty are going to want the literature. Some are going to want to see data and understand that, and actually see like these are the studies that have been done that show that this impacts STEM education, right? And some are just going to be doing me a favor, right? And coming to my workshop because they're my buddy and I ask them to, can you come? Like, why don't you come? Like, I think, I would like your feedback, and you kind of present it like that, right? And so it just depends on your relationship with the person and the person themselves. Like how are you going to get them to absorb the information, whether it's, like I said, giving them some data and some evidence, or, going at it from the interpersonal perspective where, hey, can you come to my workshop on this? I'm worried that nobody's going to come. Will you please come and just be a body in the room, right? And they end up coming, and then they end up taking a little nugget and then thinking about it, and then that can lead to some change in their instruction. So
I think you bring up a very important point that I think that I haven't considered, that the fact that I think we focus so much on the student when so far what I've been learning in instructional design, but I never really thought that part of your target audience that you have to gain an understanding for is the instructor themselves.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Never thought about it. So is designing inclusive course for STEM a common trend or a relatively new one?
So I think it's new in higher ed, but like I said, in K-12, that's just something that you did. And when COVID hit, I was teaching an engineering class to middle schoolers. And, how do you teach online engineering, a class that was literally just, when you're in person, is building stuff. It was the class where you had the popsicle sticks and the cardboard and you were making a house and you were making things. And so, we put our heads together and thought like, how can we spend $25 per student and put together some kits and deliver them to their houses so they have materials to do this at home, right? And so the same thing applies to higher ed courses, right? You have to sit back and think, what are the tools that my students need, all students, right? What are the tools they need in order to succeed in my course, whether it's writing skills, right? In a STEM class, writing still matters, whether it's math skills, right? How can I support their quantitative reasoning? How can I support their math skills? Whether it's just reading comprehension skills, test taking skills, right? All of these soft skills that aren't specifically content related, those things need to be embedded into your course no matter what level you teach. And so that is definitely an approach that I think is growing momentum as instructors are now seeing these kind of bimodal students coming in, and students that are lacking in some basic skills, whether it's due to COVID or whether it's the Gen Z effect or whatever, nobody really knows yet, but yeah, so there's definitely some movement there. And I think that is the challenge. But for me personally, I don't think it is a challenge to integrate inclusivity into my courses, because it's something that I've always done.
That's awesome, honestly. Do you think designing inclusive courses for STEM is essential or even necessary?
I mean, clearly, yeah, it is essential. And I think, again, as a white woman, like teaching these courses, I always try to bring in different perspectives into my courses and have guest speakers and bring in videos and make sure that different groups are represented so that people can see themselves in the people who are presenting or sharing or distributing information to them, that it's not always just me. And I think that's so important in the 100 level classes that I teach, at least, for all my students who are super eager to either get out of my bio class or dive further into their bio major, depending on who they are, for them to kind of get that perspective. So I do think it is immensely important. And with the kind of just global trend towards STEM education in general. And frankly, there's been a little bit of kind of backslide in STEM, like this STEM push that was all of like the early 2000s. It's kind of backsliding a little bit. And I think that's just the normalization of just educational trends. Like everything for so long was STEM, 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 STEM. And people are like, hold on, wait, what about art? What about music? And what about trades, right? Those kind of majors and focuses are growing, just to equalize a little bit of the momentum that STEM had behind it for so long.
Yeah, I do have a kind of question that's related to that. Do you think that your awareness of DEI and inclusivity as an educator, do you think it started when you started to teach K-12, or do you think it started earlier than that? Because for me personally, I think mine started just being a female in STEM and looking around the room and not seeing many people that look like me for various reasons.
Yeah, big time. My awareness of it, and that's the thing, is I knew that there was something, I just didn't know what it was, right? So I knew that there was a barrier. I knew that there was this kind of like, I felt like I didn't fit a mold, and I felt like I didn't fit the expectation of what it was. It's hard to see, but I'm blonde. And so, growing up as a blonde, kind of attractive girl, you kind of get this kind of like, oh, you're cute, you're and you don't get that, but I'm smart too, so it's this, it is a little bit of this othering that takes place. And so I remember approaching my guidance counselor when I was in high school and telling him that I wanted to major in genetic engineering, and I just was looking for colleges that offered genetic engineering. And this was back in the late 90s, right? I graduated in 1999, and there were 2 colleges in all of the United States that offered genetic engineering as a major. And I wish he would have had the foresight to say, look, you don't have to major in genetic engineering, you could major in biological engineering. That was no, I didn't know that was even a question to ask at the time, right? And maybe he didn't take me seriously when I was, asking these types of questions. And so it was very early on that I realized that, I was at a disadvantage. And like you said, sitting in those classes and taking the lab classes and being in organic chemistry and calculus and all those higher math classes and feeling like I was in an uphill battle was a very real experience for me. And I still feel like it plays a role in some cases where I'm sitting at the table and I'm the only woman. And I do feel like, you know, being in my 40s though helps me with that, because I have a little bit more ownership over who I am than I was when I was like in my 20s. So age does make a difference a little bit.
Awesome. Okay, so do you think Addie is the appropriate design model when using inclusive STEM courses? If so, why or why not?
Yeah, I honestly, I think the most important part of the Addie model is that evaluate and reflect piece at the end. Because that is something that is inherent to all good instruction, right? If you're not taking the time to reflect on the effectiveness of your lesson, on how your lesson was received from your students, asking specifically for feedback, either with informal surveys or one-on-one discussions, doing that reflective piece is something that it is necessary at all levels of instruction. And so I like that Addie includes that in the model. And so yeah, I would say that's a very good model for introducing and kind of embedding inclusivity and DEI initiatives into coursework.
Okay. Do you think Addie could be adapted to be a more inclusive model?
Yeah, I think it could. I think if more colleges kind of looked at this model and implemented it as their kind of, you know, goalpost of DEI instruction, I think it would go over well. It's pretty straightforward. It looks like it's easy to use. It would be easy to communicate to educators and instructors. And so I think that using it as a model would be beneficial.
Okay. Is there a design model you prefer using for this application?
So no, and this goes back to the fact that, and maybe this is just because I'm a little green, but as a K-12 educator, we didn't have acronyms and models, at least that were communicated to us. Maybe they came from curricular offices, but by the time it got to the teacher level, it was just like, do this. And so I don't know of a specific model that would be used, but like I said, I think that Addie is a great model, and as long as any model that's implemented has that reflective and evaluative piece at the end, as with anything, you know, you're not going to grow, you're not going to change, you're not going to continue moving the needle in any direction if you don't pause and think about where you were and where you want to be at incremental time periods. So whether that's after every lesson you teach, after every interaction with a student, after every workshop that you put on, you know, there should always be a point where you pause and say, okay, is this the direction that I want to go? Was this assignment, assessment, objective, right? Going in the right direction, or is there something that I need to do to reframe it?
Okay, so that brings up an interesting question, honestly, because Addie is cyclical, right? So you do that at the end, but you as a designer, do you put like benchmarks? Do you get feedback throughout the phase, or do you wait till the end to get your feedback and then make any changes at the end?
Yeah, so that's what's kind of tricky about my position at this college. So I am mostly focused on designing and implementing courses for faculty, right? So most of what I do is faculty facing, not student facing. And so in that process, you know, I will put together a workshop or some sort of like a workshop series. And yes, absolutely. After every workshop, that's like an hour and a half, there's always like a reflective piece, a discussion piece with faculty, or maybe it's just a one-on-one side conversation afterwards with some of the faculty about how things went or what their takeaways were, or what could be changed or improved for next time. There's not a real chance for me to see like a specific course design from start to finish yet, because I've only been in this position for 6 months. We have designed one course, and the course is for instructors to take for them to get certified to teach online courses. So we have a course for instructors to teach online courses, and that course we piloted over the summer. We had 2 faculty go through the course. My colleague and I worked through and created different kind of benchmarks for what we wanted to see in the course and in terms of the output. And then we surveyed the 2 instructors that took the course, and we modified accordingly. And now we're in our phase 1 of rolling out the course for other instructors, and we'll kind of do the same thing with that. And there was not, what I would have liked to see is like a remediation for those first 2 instructors that went through the course, like a revisiting, so like, hey, you took, the A version of our course, now we have the B version of our course. Can you just take a look at it without overburdening them and expecting them to go through the whole course, but just so that they can see the improvements and see the feedback and how it impacted our second design. But with that said, it's the middle of the fall semester. These instructors are teaching a full course load, and so getting proper feedback is always and will always be a struggle for anyone in that position. Just to try to get proper feedback is very difficult. So ideally, we would have gotten good feedback, and we'll get some more feedback after this round, and we'll continue to make improvements. But again, with only 2 people going through it now and 2 people that went through it in the summer, it's the life of a small liberal arts college. It is what it is.
Definitely understand. You bring up a good point with another challenge, right? Feedback is crucial, but it's also challenging to get.
Yeah.
So definitely, and with time constraints,
Yeah.
definitely. So you bring up another great challenge. So that being said, do you have any advice for future instructional designers for inclusive STEM courses?
Yes. My biggest one, and this is just one of my core foundational beliefs, is collaboration and making sure that you have the proper people at the table when you're making decisions, right? And so I think that the backbone of DEI initiatives includes, any courses, any policies, any things that are being created to be implemented either in one course or in all the courses college-wide. You need to make sure that you have a representative from all different backgrounds, from all different identities, from all different stakeholders at the table before you make decisions to implement them, because that power of perspective is huge. And how decisions and policies are interpreted by different people, with their different positionalities and how they come to the table is crucial to making a program successful or not successful. And so I think that's where it starts, with that collaborative decision making being the backbone of any course design.
Well, that is awesome. You brought up so many good points, so many things for me to think about. And I'm sure when my classmates see this, it would evoke thought for them as well. Because this is, we've had conversations about these things in our discussion post, of course. And some of these points have not come up, which is surprising because we're quite a chatty and intelligent bunch. So you definitely brought some new stuff to the table for us to go back and think about. And I just want to thank you so much.
No
And
problem.
especially for your time and highlighting how important inclusivity is. And of course, also identifying that that educational gap between the inclusivity being such a concern in K-12 and in younger years, but then when we get to higher ed, it's not a thing, which is mind
Exactly.
concept, which is mind blowing. So thank you so much.
No problem, Kim. I will stop the recording.